morning. My name is Elizabeth Castagnon. I am the president of the Sociology, Social Justice, and Activism Co. here on SSU. And we're the ones who put on Social Justice Week. And this is our last event for the week. So thank you for showing up. As you know, we have Medea Benjamin. And Medea Benjamin is a longtime peace and social justice activist. She is the co-founder of Code Pink and Global Exchange. And Medea has worked for peace all over the world, and she has been in Iraq. She has worked for peace in Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and in Washington, D.C. So please, or she's gone to Washington, D.C. It's kind of blurry here. But thank you so much. She's really a great activist, and I'm very honored to have her here on our campus. So if you would all help me welcome her up here again.
So thank you so much for the invitation to come here. I know we would have had more students, except a lot of them left for the weekend, and it's a holiday weekend, so I'm sorry about that, but I'm really glad that there are some students here, and I'm glad there's all kinds of people here. How many of you know about Code Pink? Could you raise your hand? How many don't really know about Code Pink? A couple of you. So there are folks here from the local chapter. Do you want to just, why don't we start out with that, because we always leave that to the end and then people are gone. So maybe you could say what local Code Pink is about and how people could get in touch.
Thanks, Medea.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Karin, and I started the chapter up here about 1.5 years ago. We work on a number of issues. Our next upcoming action is around Tax Day, the Global Days Against Military Spending. We're going to do a demonstration outside of probably the federal building, since nobody seems to do their taxes on paper anymore. But there is a sign-up list circulating. You can sign the main sheet and you'll just get alerts. There is another page if you actually want to join our local chapter. What else have we done? We lobbied Jared Huffman on the Iran nuclear deal, along with a bunch of other groups. We do a number of different actions. We're participating in an anti-police brutality coalition up here, so there's a lot going on about the wars overseas and the wars at home. So I'll leave it with that, but we welcome your contributions and your inspirations for what we can do in Sonoma County. Thanks.
Great, and when we get to discussion, hopefully we can talk about some of the local actions. We're also passing around a sign-up sheet. We don't want to leave that till the end either. Important thing about activism is that we stay in touch with each other, and we need to build stronger movements in everything we do, but particularly around these issues of global peace movement. How many of you here participated in some protest against the Iraq War? And how many of you didn't? And how many of you were too young to have done it? So when Code Pink started, it was right after the 9/11 attacks, and we were part of a mobilization globally that said, wait, this is not the way to go, stop, don't do it. I don't know about you, but I sure wish that George Bush would have listened to us. Because if you think what has transpired since then, and how it is affecting the world every single day. I mean, just think of the Belgian attacks. Those wouldn't have happened were it not for the US invasion of Iraq. The Paris attacks wouldn't have happened were it not for the invasion of Iraq. ISIS would not exist today were it not for the invasion of Iraq. So much of what is happening in the Middle East and then the reverberations here at home and in Europe is because of the invasion of Iraq. And that's what got us started as Code Pink, and that's what got so many people started. There's a wonderful video, if you haven't seen it, called We Are Many. Anybody see that? Oh, it's really great. You could probably find it online now. It was done by somebody in the UK, and he traced all of these protests that happened around the world on February 15th, 2003, when the world said no to war. And he says that it was the largest day of demonstrations ever in the history of humanity, where people all across the globe stood up and said, this is the disastrous policy, don't do it, don't go to war, it will be terrible. Now think about it, that so many millions of people knew that it was a bad thing. So many millions of people who are not foreign policy experts, who hadn't been briefed by the Pentagon or the CIA, they all knew that it was the wrong thing to do. And yet, we had so many people in our Congress, in our government, and even Hillary Clinton, who didn't know it was the wrong thing to do. And I bring this up as the beginning of my talk because it was the beginning of Code Pink. And we knew enough to not only say this war will be disastrous, but we wanted to get a real grounding about it by going to Iraq. And that's one of the first things that we did, was to get a group of women together to say, let's go to this country where the US is about to bomb and see what those people think about it. And I'll never forget that trip because it had such an incredible impression on me. As much as I try not to have stereotypes about what people in other countries are like, you thought Saddam Hussein, terrible dictator, repressive, what are we gonna find there? And what we found was a vibrant society, yes, repressed by a dictator, but they found all kinds of ways to go around him. They found all kinds of ways to be getting themselves an education. We met women who had PhDs, we met women who were doctors and lawyers and teachers, and my first encounter with Iraqi woman was somebody who came up to say to me, oh, you're American, which of the black women poets is your favorite? I've been reading Nikki Giovanni, I've been reading Alice Walker, and she wanted to name all these black women poets that I didn't even know. And I was amazed and said to her, you must have studied in the United States. And she had beautiful English. She said, I've never been out of Iraq, but I love poetry, and I've been studying this at the university in Baghdad. And that is just one example of the amazing women that we met. And yeah, they didn't like Saddam Hussein. And yeah, they wanted to overthrow a dictator. And you know what they said to us? They said, let us do that. That is our job as Iraqis. You can't bring democracy through missiles and bombs. It has to be brought by the people themselves. And I look back at that with such anguish and think of all the wonderful people that we met over the years going back to Iraq and how disastrous their lives have turned out. Almost all of them are either dead or living in other countries in exile. And think of the millions of people whose lives have been affected by that invasion. And as we mourn people in Paris, San Bernardino, as we mourn people in Brussels, let's remember the huge number of people that we killed. We killed those people, we displaced those people. And there has been absolutely no accountability. And that's something that as Code Pink, I would say we're one of the only organizations, unfortunately, that keeps saying, what about the accountability for the Iraq invasion? Why is it that from George Bush to Donald Rumsfeld to Dick Cheney to Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, they all have their memoirs. And they go out speaking with their memoirs, and they make tons of money speaking, and they're considered these great statespeople. Why? They're war criminals. There should be tribunals where they should be brought before tribunals, and they should be given a fair trial for the crimes that they committed. And unfortunately, when you are the most powerful country, you don't have to be accountable. But yet people around the world, and especially in the Middle East, ask about that. They ask about why it is that the US can constantly get away with destroying other countries, killing people, no due process, nothing. and we think there won't be blowback for that? It doesn't make any sense. So when I look at the policies over these past 14 years, it breaks my heart to think how badly we have reacted to the 9/11 attacks, how we should have treated it like a crime against humanity and gone after the individuals who attacked us. And you know what? If we went after the individuals who attacked us, we would also be led to a country that is the greatest U.S. ally in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and that is Saudi Arabia. Now, I've been doing a lot of work these past years, going to Yemen, going to Afghanistan, going to Iraq, going to Pakistan, going to Egypt, and everywhere I go, people ask, why is the U.S. such a close ally of Saudi Arabia if you're going to pick one country most responsible for the 9/11 attacks? And why isn't your peace movement doing anything about this? And that's what led me most recently to be focusing on Saudi Arabia. 15 of the 19 hijackers from Saudi Arabia, money from Saudi Arabia going to fuel extremism. And the foundation of the state of Saudi Arabia comes from a pact between a reactionary, intolerant sect within Islam called Wahhabism and a Saudi family. And when they made the pact together, they said, okay, we're going to use this religion as a way to justify us taking over this Arabian Peninsula, and then when oil was discovered, to use that oil wealth for a very, very small group of people, the Saud family, the kings and the princes, and use this Wahhabi religion as an excuse, really. And had it not been for the petrodollars, Wahhabism would have been a small, small sect that probably would have disappeared. And were it not for the U.S. that came in and said, aha, we need that oil, the Saud family and that dynasty would most likely have been overthrown. So we have to take a lot of responsibility for the fact that over decades and 12 different presidents, Republicans and Democrats alike, our military has supported and provided security for this repressive regime. And just to give you a sense of how repressive that regime is, there are absolutely no political parties, no freedom of association, no freedom of speech. I mean, I showed the video before you came in of this guy doing a parody of a No Women, No Cry to the tune, making it No Women, No Drive. But that's as much as you can get away with in Saudi Arabia. You go a little step further than that and you will be in prison. I don't know if you heard the case of Raif Badawi, a blogger, for blogging some mild criticisms that he'd like a government that was more democratic, given 15 years in prison and sentenced to 1,000 lashes. 1,000 lashes. So they took him out one day and they take people to public squares to do the lashing. And they start beating on this guy. Well, somebody filmed it and put it out to the world. And there was such a huge reaction against this that's the one positive thing I can say is that we in the international community haven't managed to free Raif Badawi, but we've managed to stop him from getting flogged another 950 times. And there are 3 young men who are part of the Shia community, which is a minority in Saudi Arabia. They were protesting as part of the Arab Spring, came to Saudi Arabia, and they said, we have been repressed for so long, we're going to go out and protest, non-violent protests. They were arrested, one of them 15 years old and 2 of them 17 years old. They are on death row. And they have not only been sentenced to execution, they've been sentenced to beheading and one of them to crucifixion. Now when I heard that, I said, what does that mean, crucifixion? And what it means is you first get your head cut off, and then you get put up on a pole with the head separate, dangling from there, and put out there for days for the public to see this. And of course, this is a warning for the rest of the community to say, don't you dare do this. And one of the young men, Ali Al-Nimr, his uncle is a very famous Sheikh Nimr, who was recently executed, again, as an example to that whole community. So we have super repressive regime, no fair trials, torture, confessions under torture used to convict people to death penalty, the country that is the #1 beheader in the world, that doesn't not only allow women to drive, I mean, that's just the tiny part of it, has a system called a guardianship system where no matter how old you are always a minor. You can be 70, 80 years old, you are a minor, and you always need a man to give you consent for doing things in your life, whether it's to get an education, to go to college, to get married, to get divorced, to bring a court case, to get employers use it, asking a male guardian to give you the right to travel, all kinds of things. You need a man to vouch for you. Saudi Arabia is a country that's built on foreign labor. 1/3 of the population comes from other countries, and some of the worst abuses of migrant labor in the world occur in Saudi Arabia because it's a sponsorship system. So if you want to get somebody to clean your house for you, you recruit them through a recruiting firm that then brings a person, let's say from the Philippines. They live in your house and you work them 10, 12 hours, 14 hours a day. If the person realizes, I made a big mistake. These people are really mean to me. They're not paying me what they said they would pay me. I get beaten. I want to go home. You can't go home. You can't go home unless your employer gives you the right to go home. That's how bad it is. So this is a country that's built on these terrible relationships among people, and where the United States had agreed to support this system because it had oil. Well, things have changed since then because the US, there's a glut in the oil market. And so we don't need the Saudi oil anymore. In fact, only 10% of the oil coming into this country is from Saudi Arabia. Well, so why do we keep this relationship? One thing I would say is that it's because they have become the #1 purchaser of US weapons. And this is part of the vicious cycle of the military-industrial complex and the weapons industry that keeps us in a perpetual state of war. And in the case of Saudi Arabia, they are using the weapons now for a war they've been waging in the poorest country in the Arabian Peninsula, and that is Yemen. And the Saudis for the last year have been constantly bombing Yemen. And I hope, Peter, this is one of your unreported Project Censored stories this year. Is it maybe? Probably. Let's hope so, because the US media has written almost nothing about Yemen. And the issue about Yemen is that the Saudis have come in, gotten involved in an internal dispute in this very poor country, and they are using our weapons to be bombing hospitals and marketplaces and schools and residences. And the majority of people who are being killed are civilians. And not only are they just using weapons, they're also using a weapon that's been banned by the international community, and that's cluster bombs. Made in the United States, sold to the Saudis, and used against international law. So we have a lot to account for in terms of supporting this regime, but unfortunately it is part of this cycle of militarism. So I do want to talk during the discussion about some of the campaigns and some of the ideas we have about how we can stop weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, how we can support the human rights activists in Saudi Arabia. Some of you, raise your hand if you were excited about Obama being in Cuba. So Obama going to Cuba is a huge breakthrough. And one of the things Obama did when he was in Cuba, he said, I want to promote human rights activists, and as part of the condition to go there is I want a meeting with those human rights activists. Well, Obama is going to Saudi Arabia on April 21st. Don't you think it would be nice if he met with human rights activists while he's there? So we want to do a whole campaign around that and get all kinds of people involved in pushing Obama to meet with pro-democracy people, dissidents, the human rights community, when he's in Saudi Arabia. It would be a huge, huge, huge breakthrough if we were able to do that. So I began by talking about the massive movement we had to try to stop the war with Iraq. That massive movement has unfortunately died out as soon as Obama became president. And when Obama became president, so many people put their hopes that this was going to be a peace president, that he was going to bring peace to the Middle East for us. People were tired from 8 years of protesting Bush. There was a financial crisis. People had lots of other things to do. For all kinds of reasons, our movement really dissipated. And it's been a tough slog for these last 7 years to try to get people involved in the peace movement. It's been very tough to get young people involved in this movement. It's been very tough to get people out on the streets around the issues of the ongoing perpetual wars in the Middle East. But I do want to say that while it's been a tough 7 years, we have had a major, major breakthrough, and that is the nuclear deal with Iran. Now, the nuclear deal with Iran is historic because we could be engaged in yet another war in the Middle East, and this would be a real doozy of a war in the Middle East if we got involved in a military engagement in Iran. I look at a wonderful person here sitting in the room, Leslie Baylock, who was with us in Code Pink years ago in Washington, D.C., trying to stop a U.S. Bombing of Iran. In fact, did long hunger strikes. How long were your hunger strikes? 24 days. Sitting in offices of people like Joseph Lieberman, trying to get meetings, trying to push for our representatives in Washington to actually talk with Iranians. And we were very involved around the fight to win this nuclear deal. And it was a very difficult fight because the strongest international foreign policy lobby group in the United States, called AIPAC, that is a pro-Israeli government lobby, wanted to quash the deal, as did a lot of other neoconservative groups. And they poured lots of money, tens of millions of dollars, into ads that were put out all over the country, into targeting key members of Senate and the Congress to say, this is a terrible deal. And the community of activists that had been pretty quiet for many years, lots of them came back and started getting involved in this campaign. And I think we did a pretty amazing job targeting senators, targeting congresspeople, saying the American people want diplomacy, we don't want more war. And we were able to defeat these big, big, powerful, moneyed interests and support Obama and John Kerry in the work they did to get the deal through. That was a major breakthrough. It was the first time in a long time that groups like AIPAC had actually been defeated. And it marked an opening for us in Washington to push more for diplomatic solutions. I mentioned Obama going to Cuba, but I think I should say a little bit more about it because, that is history in the making, and it just happened in this past year. Some of us, including myself, have been working on that for many, many, many decades. It doesn't just happen that a president says, okay, I'm going to change US policy. It comes from a long, sometimes very slow slog of trying to open up relations, of citizen diplomacy, of trying to change public opinion so that leaders then feel that their backs are covered when they make policy changes. And I see my old colleague June Brashears here, who I worked with for a long time in global exchange, where we've been working for years, taking people to Cuba constantly. At one point, I think we had about 80 trips a year that we were doing. I don't know how the hell we ever did that. But, building up people-to-people ties. How many people in this audience have ever been to Cuba? So, quite a number in a small group. It's that kind of diplomacy, it's that kind of work that opens the doors to things like the historic change we see in US relations in Cuba. I mean, seeing an embassy in Washington, D.C., and we were there when the flag went up, was just a moment of tremendous joy. Seeing a US flag going up in Havana and the turning of that into an embassy, also a moment of joy. Anytime that we can push the people in power to do something that puts diplomacy over hostilities should be a time of tremendous joy for us in the United States. So those were two major successes that we've had in a pretty bleak landscape for the peace movement. Bleak landscape, I would say, it doesn't get much bleaker than Syria. And Syria is a disaster for everybody. It's a lose-lose. There is no winners except the weapons manufacturers in the case of Syria. And in fact, US weapon manufacturers are supplying weapons to all sides that are fighting each other. But for the people of Syria, it's been an absolute catastrophe. For the global community, that we haven't been able to stop this has been a catastrophe. And it's been very difficult to get the peace movement going on this because there are big differences over how people see the issue and where we could find common ground and what we could do. And in fact, one of the only things that we thought we could do as Code Pink was to push for the peace talks to happen and to try to get women at the table at those peace talks. And when the first peace talks were announced in Geneva, we got together with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Some of you might know that group, WILF, and a couple of other women's groups, and said, let's try to get women at the peace table. After all, the United Nations has for many years said and passed a resolution called 1327 that said women must be at the table for peace talks. Women have to be involved in the process. And not just because it's our right to be there, it's because when you have women there, there's a much greater likelihood that you will actually come to an agreement. And we worked with 40 Syrian women on different sides of the issue and brought them to Geneva and lobbied hard with John Kerry and the other sides to say, put these women at the peace table, or at least a representative or 2 or 3 women at the peace table. And no, it was only men at the peace table. It was only men with guns at the peace table. Women that were not even given observer status at the peace table. And so no wonder there was no positive outcome of those negotiations. And one of the other things I think we could agree on as a peace community is that we had to support the refugees. And there was a lot of work that I was involved in Washington, D.C., to increase the number of refugees from Syria that would be able to come to the United States. We weren't very successful on that, but we were successful in getting a lot more money from the US to go towards helping humanitarian aid for the Syrian refugees. Unfortunately, I think when you look at Syria, what you really have to say is that we in the peace movement have not been able to respond at the level that the crisis demands. And we still haven't. Another area that I wanted to talk about where we have had some impact is around Israel and Palestine. Now, I don't know how many of you follow this closely enough to have known that the lobby group AIPAC had its yearly meeting last week. But it became a big issue because they invite all of the presidential candidates to speak. And Donald Trump agreed to speak, Ted Cruz agreed to speak, Kasich agreed to speak, Hillary Clinton agreed to speak. There was one candidate who did not agree to speak. And how ironic that it is the Jewish candidate who refused to speak there, the candidate who's actually spent significant time in Israel refused to speak there, and that was Bernie Sanders. And yeah, I think that deserves some applause because it actually took a lot of guts to say, I'm too busy to speak at AIPAC. And he said, I would be willing to speak remotely, and I will give you the text of what I would say. And what he said is what no other candidate said. He mentioned the word Palestine and the Palestinians. The other candidates didn't even bother to talk about the Palestinians. It is such a twisted political scene when it comes to Israel-Palestine in this country, that just to say that you are for human rights of all people, including the Palestinians, is like a major breakthrough. Just to say that you think it is terrible that the Israelis continue to illegally increase the number of settlements because it makes it harder and harder and harder to ever think of a way out of this morass takes tremendous political courage in this country. And I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the speeches, but they were just terrible. And I will single out, not because it was the worst, but because one would want better, the speech of Hillary Clinton. And what I found so demoralizing in her speech is that the one movement globally that is a non-violent movement to try to support the efforts of the Palestinians for justice is called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, the BDS movement. It's a movement that's based on long traditions, whether it's Cesar Chavez and the farm workers here or the anti-apartheid movement, but its roots are in struggles for justice all over the world. And it is a movement that has caught momentum in places as far away as South Africa, to all over Europe, to here in the United States. And when I say that the peace movement has really lost a lot of its steam, there is one area of the peace movement, and that is around Israel and Palestine, that has a lot of momentum, particularly among young people on campuses. And that is the BDS movement. The Students for Justice in Palestine are very strong on campuses around the country, and they've come under tremendous attack. And the lobby that is connected to AIPAC has tried to equate justice for Palestine with anti-Semitism. It is untrue. It is a terrible thing to try to equate those things, but that's what they have been doing, and they've been going after students and attacking them and trying to stop BDS movements on campuses. And Hillary Clinton fed right into that. She told students on campus to stay strong in fighting against BDS on the campuses. Fighting against a non-violent movement that says that we should not keep supporting illegal activities of Israel. And I just felt so horrible when I heard her say that, and the message that that sends to students on campuses who are rising up in this justice movement. But despite that, there have been many wins in this BDS movement on a global level, and very recently. In fact, there is a company from the UK called G4S that has been involved in selling equipment that's used in the prisons and used at checkpoints. And they recently said they would be canceling and not doing any new contracts in Israel because it was so bad for their reputation. There's a company, Veolia, a French company, that was building trams that would go take people from settlement to settlement. And these are trams that connected illegal settlements, but of course that Palestinians could not use. And after years of a campaign, they finally said they were breaking ties with the Israeli contract. We at Code Pink, for 7 years, have been focusing on a cosmetic company called Ahava that was being produced in illegal settlements and was taking minerals from the Dead Sea to use for products that were being sold as if they were made in Israel. And we said they are not made in Israel, they're made in occupied Palestine. And we had campaign that would range from going into stores where we were dressed, either the young people in their bikinis, some of us older women in our robes, as if we were going to a spa with our head in towels and putting the mud that they sell and saying that Ahava is dirty, that stealing people's lands is dirty, and Ahava means love, and our campaign was There's No Love in Stolen Land. And we got places after places to say they would no longer carry Ahava because it just wasn't worth it for them. And then most recently, we had a real win, which is the company said they were going to move their factory off of an illegal settlement. And that is a great victory for us. Just as it was a great victory, a campaign around SodaStream that we worked on, a group called Jewish Voice for Peace worked on, and finally, after a lot of pressure, you know what SodaStream is? That, no? Some people? Water. Yeah, fizzy water. Something we really need. They finally said they were also going to move their factory off of illegal settlement. We have 2 campaigns that we're working on now. One is around Remax. You know, Remax is a real estate company, and they are selling homes in illegal settlements. In fact, until we started our campaign, you could go online and you could pick an illegal settlement and go on there and see these homes for sale that were $1 million homes with pools and, you know, beautiful view of Palestinian lands. And it was just so sad to see this. Now they've taken a lot of them off because they don't want people to see, but we still are pressuring, because we haven't won that campaign yet, for Remax to stop selling homes in illegal settlements. There's another campaign kind of similar to that, which is Airbnb. So Airbnb is allowing people to put up for rent homes and rooms in illegal settlements. And so we have had a very lively campaign around that with all kinds of great satires about it and YouTubes, and we've been trying to meet with people in the Airbnb headquarters, and I think it's going to be a successful campaign because I think we've been putting a lot of pressure on that company. So these are examples of nonviolent tactics that can work and are very important to be supporting. And I hope those of you who haven't been involved will sign up, and maybe we could talk about some things that people could do to support those campaigns. A few other things that I wanted to mention. I talked about when I talked about Saudi Arabia, the military-industrial complex, and how it keeps us in this constant state of war. Well, when you talk to members of Congress about trying to cut a particular weapons system or talk about the need to reduce the Pentagon budget, one of the responses they will have is that it creates jobs. Now, this is actually absurd because anything will create jobs if you throw billions of dollars into it. In fact, there was a great study done by the University of Massachusetts that compared for every $1 billion how many jobs you would get if you put the money into education, or you put the money into healthcare, or you put the money into green energy, or I think there was a category if you drop the money from a helicopter. And all of them would create more jobs than if you gave it to the military. The military was the lowest number of jobs per $1 billion spent. And that is because the military is so bad in how it uses its money. You know, there has never been an audit of the Pentagon. You know why? Because the Pentagon can't pass an audit. Because the Pentagon loses billions of our dollars. And the other thing is that because it's so consolidated, the weapons industries, there is so little bidding on contracts. You might, those of you old enough to remember, you might have remembered that Halliburton got a $5 billion no contract bid before the war in Iraq even began. Dick Cheney, yep. And so the Pentagon is a huge waste of our tax dollars, to say nothing about what the weapons get used for to kill people, just talking about how badly they spend their money. There's a weapon system you might have heard of called the F-35. So this is the biggest boondoggle. So far, it has cost us taxpayers $379 billion. Let it sink in, $1 billion. And over the life of this system, it will cost us over $1 trillion. I mean, this could pay for Bernie Sanders' program for free education for everybody for years to come. It's a huge amount of money for a boondoggle of an airplane we don't need, because there are so many we already have, and that has had tremendous problems all the time, years and years delays and huge cost overruns. You know how much the helmet for a pilot of the F-35 costs? Take a guess. $5,000. That's a reasonable guess. Anybody else want to do a guess? $400,000. That man back there knows. $400,000 for the helmet for the F-35. I mean, remember like the toilet that was the joke because, you know, it cost $400 for a toilet in the Pentagon? $400,000 for the helmet. Well, last week, I used to live in California. I moved to Washington, D.C. because it's, you know, where so much of the action is, and we go to a lot of hearings. And so 2 days ago, we went to a hearing that was for the F-35. And in that hearing, they talked about what a bargain it is now, because now they've inflated the cost, so then they could say, oh, we're coming in under budget now, after they were over budget for so many years. They also said, and it was in the papers today, that it needs a facelift for the American public, because the American public, if they know about this weapon, they have a pretty negative feeling about it because it's cost so much and so many overruns. And so what they're doing now is they're going to go around the country to all these, do air shows to show people how great this weapon is, and to get a lot of new enthusiasm for this weapon system. So immediately I thought that Code Pink and our allies must go out to every single air show that's happening and show the American people what a horrible waste of our tax dollars this F-35 is. And the other thing that, there's a funny story about this hearing because we were busy with other hearings. There was a Guantanamo hearing going on, and by the way, at the Guantanamo hearing, we were wearing our orange jumpsuits. And I'll digress for a minute because they wouldn't let us in the hearing with the orange jumpsuits. They said, the chairman says no costumes are allowed inside the hearing. And we said, costume? This is what you put on prisoners. I don't think it's a costume. And they said, we call it a costume. And then a general went by with like a million different things on there, and I said, that looks like a costume. Oh, they didn't like that. And so we were fighting about getting into this hearing. And in the meantime, we took half the costume off and, tucked it in and said, okay, now can we go in? Well, they let us in then. And one of the things in that hearing that happened is that the Pentagon and the State Department actually want to close Guantanamo, and the Congress doesn't want them to close Guantanamo. And so one of the things that came out in that hearing that I thought was quite extraordinary is the person responsible for the Pentagon said, the admirals and generals that we've been talking with say the most effective counterterrorism measure we could take would be to close Guantanamo. So let's come back to that, because that was a digression, because I was telling you about the F-35 story. So there was a line to get into the F-35 hearing, and it was all guys in suits, all men in suits, and because we were busy with the other hearings, there was one Code Pink young woman who was online to get into that hearing. And she texted us and she said, help, I'm the only one online here who's not part of the weapons industry. I've been talking to these people online, and they're all recycled from government into the weapons industry. And I heard them talking about Code Pink, and they were saying how much they hate Code Pink. And she said, they said, I hope nobody from Code Pink shows up at these hearings because we hate those people. They come in and they talk bad about our weapons system and they hold up signs in the hearings and they're so horrible. And they get these young women who know nothing about any of these issues. And they pay these women to sit in the hearings and hold up signs. So she's listening to all of this. So she waits until the doors open, and she gets inside the hearing room, and she takes off her jacket, and she has a Code Pink shirt on, and she gets up and she says to them, by the way, nobody paid me to come to this hearing. I'm an intern with Code Pink, and it's a very competitive thing to be able to win an internship with Code Pink. And I'm really proud that I am, and I know a lot about these issues. I thought that was quite beautiful. So talking about these weapon systems, I was reading the paper on my way here in the plane, and this full-page ad in the Washington Post, there's one like this almost every day. It's from either Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin. This one's from Boeing. And it's to glorify the military. And who do you think pays for these ads? I mean, this is us, right? This is our money. I'm trying to get an ad in the Washington Post to ask Obama to meet with Saudi democracy advocates when he goes. It's going to cost like $70,000 to get an ad in. And we're trying to figure out, how we can pay for that. In the meantime, every day, just about every single day, there is a full-page ad from these weapons manufacturers paid for by our tax money. This glorification of the military is everywhere. I took Southwest Airlines the other day. And Southwest Airlines, when you're about to go on the plane, they say, okay, pre-boarding. Now, pre-boarding, they're not saying people with little children, they're not saying people who can't walk, the wheelchair. Pre-boarding, members of the military, pre-board. And we want to thank you for your service. Now, I don't know about you, but that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I got up and I said, are there any teachers in the area here? Why don't you pre-board, and we want to thank you for your service? Are there any healthcare workers here? Are there any environmentalists here trying to save the planet? Why don't you pre-board? We have to counter the militarism, the glorification of the military everywhere we find it, because it's so pervasive in our world, in our community, and living in DC, boy, it's really, really pervasive. So I wanted to mention another article that was in today's paper. And this is something that I found just lovely. It's called Millennials Embrace Socialism. Now, this is something that should give us a lot of hope. Because just think before Bernie's campaign, socialism. And people were afraid to say they were socialists. It would put you out on the fringe of the fringes to say that you were socialism. And along comes Bernie Sanders, and he says, yeah, I'm a socialist. And what they find in this article is that more people under 30 had a favorable perception of socialism than they did of capitalism. Now that is extraordinary. Now the article says they don't know what socialism is. They think it's something like Scandinavia, and I think it's part of that talking down to young people. Just like those men in their suits online said that the Code Pink young women didn't know what they were talking about. I think a lot of young people do know what they're talking about. So who in this room is under 30 and who would consider yourself favorable to socialism? All right, so why don't you give us a reason why?
Because I like the idea of Bernie being president who promises for free college and equal for everybody, who's also an activist for Black Lives Matter and women's rights and all those things that I believe in.
Who else? Saw some hands in the back there. Can you tell us why?
It's a step in the right direction of putting people's rights before money.
Anybody else? All right, I'll say not under 30 anymore. Who has a favorable view of socialism and would like to say why? Who has a favorable view of, you want to say why?
Yeah. I think it's just a way of acknowledging that we don't really want such strong capitalism. So whether it's for socialism, I think it's more against capitalism.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people are saying the system we have now is not working for us. Maybe we should look for something else.
People don't say this very often, but I actually think because it's cheaper. Because you don't have to skim off profits.
So, I mean, I know it's kind of becoming a mantra right now, but I believe that it would put people and planet before profit.
Because democracy shouldn't end when you go into the workplace. It should be at the workplace as well.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Just a commercial first. If you haven't seen Where to Invade Next, I strongly recommend that. And Mr. Chomsky's Requiem for the American Dream, I also recommend that. And a takeaway from that in regards to socialism is Chomsky is a linguist, is the word social. And we are a fragmented people, and we have very little solidarity. And just the social part of it would go a long way to solving a lot of problems.
Who else? Anybody else?
Get my side? Okay. Well, we practice socialism. Really, it's not that far away from us. Really, with libraries, our free education, grade school, high school. We have that. We have police department, fire department. That's all socialism. Our social security cards. So, it's just embellishing on that really, and going back to the free education, because I remember 40 years ago at City College, it was pretty free. I think it only cost a few dollars to go to City College, and the textbooks were cheap, maybe $10. Now they're $200 or $300. I don't know what the latest is, but and then going to a state college, it wasn't that expensive. So we just need to get back to that. And Bernie can help us. We've got to, and I'm really upset about the cheating at the polls. I'm wondering if you have ideas about how we can circumvent that before this election's over.
Well, we'll go into discussion, but I just want to see if there's anybody else that wants to say why they would look at an alternative. Yeah.
Thank you. I teach literature, and I've always taught socialism and Marxism in my classes for 18 years here. And what I always teach the students is that it's about values. And capitalism only values what can be produced and sold and marketed. And we end up feeling like we have to beg those people for the things that we really value, which are the things of compassion and empathy and caring, and all those people.
Yeah.
I just think both socialism and communism have a lot more congruence with true democracy than capitalism does. And it's unfortunate that democracy oftentimes gets defined as capitalism.
Anybody else? Yes.
So we know that the wealthy already have socialism. I think everyone else should have socialism too.
I say the military is the largest socialist institution in the world. I didn't do that as to push socialism necessarily. It's because I think it's great that young people are looking for alternatives. And we are in a moment that it's scary when you look at Donald Trump and all the support that he's getting. On the other hand, it's also positive that people are against the establishment, whether it's on the side of Bernie or Trump. People don't like the status quo. And I think it's really exciting that so many young people have gotten involved and are questioning why they should graduate in debt when it's not happening in other countries. People questioning why, as good as we can get, is Obamacare really? When there's much better systems around. People questioning why we're not putting the F-35 $379 billion into green energy instead of into weapon systems we don't need. People questioning why our police are militarized, why we are killing so many young people of color, and why we are incarcerating so many of them, and why we've allowed it to become a for-profit industry to put people in prison, whether they are in immigration detention centers or other prison facilities. How obscene is that, to have people make a profit by incarcerating people? So it's a time when a lot of young people are questioning a lot of things. And that to me is the most hopeful thing that I see. I've lived in countries that have called themselves socialist, including Cuba, and I've seen a lot of problems, lots and lots and lots of problems. When the state takes too much control, when you don't have a kind of vibrant civil society where people can really put pressure on the government. So we need hybrid systems. And I think that's what Bernie is talking about, hybrid systems. And I just wanted to end my talk now by saying when you look for hybrid systems, we have to look at the good and bad in our own system and the good and bad in other systems. And I was really quite amazed that Barack Obama, when he was in Cuba, said, we accept and welcome criticism of our own country. That was pretty amazing for him to say there. And certainly he gave lots of criticism of the Cuban system, and much of it well-deserved. But there is a need to learn from others. And that's why I think the Michael Moore film is so fantastic. Where Should We Invade Next? And that's why I think a tiny little country like Cuba can teach us something about values. With an economic system that doesn't work very well, on the other hand, there is a set of values that is quite extraordinary. And I lived in Cuba for a couple of years in the early 80s. And I remember back then, my mom, who is since deceased, and I having a conversation about values and who we like, who are our role models. And way back then, my mom, may she rest in peace, said that her role model was Donald Trump, back then. And I said my role model was Che Guevara. And they were different. And when I lived in Cuba, I rode a bicycle to work. And every day I would go out of my way, going a long way around. And people would say, why don't you go the direct route? And I said, because there is a billboard that I like to look at every day on my way to work. I grew up in a capitalist society where the billboards you see are buy this, buy that, buy this, buy that. And this is a different billboard, and it just gives me great joy to go by it every day. And that billboard was a quote by Che Guevara. And it was at the front of a children's hospital. And it said, the life of one child is worth more than all the riches of the wealthiest person on earth. And I thought, what a wonderful way to start the day. And I think as we look around and we look at this crazy system that we have and the electoral campaign that is very unique, let's remember that at the basis of it all is a question of values. As you teach your students, is it about wealth? Is it about what you can buy, the power that you can buy? Or is it about community and each other and children and life and love? Let's put those values first. Thank you. Good for you to stretch. We do activist yoga at Code Pink, which is reach for the people in power and water the base, make the base grow, and pull people from the right and pull them over to the left. Pull from the right, go to the left, pull from the right, go to the rest. And then we do a last one, which is, quick, the police are coming, run! Anyway, so let's open it up now for discussion. Yeah.
Hybrid system, social anarchism. Or maybe you could comment on something. How much longer do you think Europe will let us lead them around by the nose?
I don't really think that we are leading Europe around by the nose. I think that in terms of social systems, there's a lot more advanced systems in Europe than in the United States. What I do think is very dangerous is NATO and this military alliance that we have that was supposed to serve a purpose during World War and be dissolved. And with the US and Europe going against what we said to the Soviet Union at the time, that we would not expand NATO to the Soviet borders, we have since gone back on and done that expansion. And I think it is a very dangerous alliance. And I would much rather see our relationships with Europe not be one mediated through that military alliance. But I'm not sure that I answered your question. Yeah.
What is the peaceful journey to ISIL?
Good question. Peaceful journey to ISIL. So I did a lot of reading of the paper on the plane, and they had a piece saying that while ISIL is doing these attacks overseas, they're really losing a lot of territory internally. And they've lost swaths of land in both Syria and Iraq. As people in the peace movement, what we have been saying is that foreign troops out, foreigners, whether it's bombing or troops, get the foreigners out. It's become a proxy war for so many different groups between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between the US and Russia. So number one thing is to say foreigners out. The other is to say an arms embargo to the region. And, Joe Biden every now and then goes off script. And he's great when he goes off script. And one thing he went off script was, he said, our biggest problem in Syria is our allies. We can't convince our allies to stop supporting the wrong side. So here we have Turkey that has been allowing a porous border for fighters to come in. Such a porous border that tankers of oil have been going in and out and in and out and in and out, getting $1 million a day that's been going to ISIS. Allowing weapons to go in. Those are our great allies, the Turks. Then you have our great allies, the Saudis, who are supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria. Al-Nusra is officially the branch of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and that's who they've been supporting. So arms embargo, getting our allies to stop allowing recruits to come in and out, and pushing for peace talks.
What do you see as the way out of the blind spot between the U.S. and Israel? Elizabeth Warren is pro-Israel.
So there's nothing wrong with being pro-Israel. It's fine to be pro-Israel as long as you are also pro-Palestinian. And Elizabeth Warren, when she came in and the Israelis had done their third attack on Gaza in recent years, she had just been elected. And she went on record saying, this was when 1,400 Palestinians had been killed. She went on record saying the Israelis have the right to defend themselves. And we just thought, oh my God, please, how could you do that? Elizabeth Warren, we love you on so many things. And we went to her office dressed as women in mourning with death masks on, and we took styrofoam and painted it gray as rubble and threw it all over her office and got down on her office and just started wailing. And we said, we're not leaving till we get to talk to either her or her chief of staff about this. This is just unacceptable. And you know, they were very nice. And the chief of staff, she wasn't there, and the chief of staff came out, and we had quite a good meeting. And we've been constantly responding to her, and her constituents have. I mean, Massachusetts, you know, it's a very liberal state. Peace Action is very strong in Massachusetts. They have been meeting with her. So she's starting to move. She came out for the Iran deal, which is a good thing. I think she did make a statement about being against illegal settlements. So people are movable somewhat, but you got to really focus on them, and you got to get a lot of their constituents working with you because they are afraid to take the right position. They're afraid of AIPAC and all the groups that AIPAC is associated with, because AIPAC has shown that they go after you and they take you out. They fund an opponent. And so really, it's all about us. You know, it's how can we get stronger to give them the space they need to do the right thing. And I think the case of Elizabeth Warren is a great one. We should be able to push her to take the right position. Elizabeth Warren, by the way, is totally off topic, but a very interesting thing that one of the columnists of the Washington Post wrote the other day, Dana Milbank. He said, what Bernie Sanders' terrific showing has shown is that if Elizabeth Warren had run, she would have won.
Actually, kind of answering your question, I think, is, for me at least, the main problem is the Jewish state itself, that the whole concept of a state for one ethnic group, that's the elephant in the room. And so, unless Americans kind of grapple with that notion, what does it mean to be a Jewish state and somehow democratic at the same time? Those are irreconcilable notions. And unless you kind of go for that directly, you'll never be able to change other people's opinions about the right to defend itself. Because Israel, in my opinion, has no right to defend itself as it is, as a Jewish state. The people have the right to live and thrive, but a Jewish state is something we should not support. But that's the key concept that I find almost no Americans actually even grapple with. So I don't know if I'm not sure Code Pink's position on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we believe in a separation of church and state. It's one of the reasons I'm working so much on Saudi Arabia now, because Israelis say, yeah, but what about the Iranian theocracy? What about the Saudi Muslim Sunni state? And so it's true, I think we have to be consistent to say we think there should be a separation of religion and state. And certainly I think the time has come and gone where there's going to be a Palestinian state. I mean, what's left there? And so the only other alternative is one democratic state.
But I guess when you say it's okay to be pro-Israel, for most Americans, they're going to hear that as pro-Jewish state.
Right.
Because that's what Obama himself is insisting on. He's insisting that the Palestinians accept Israel as a Jewish state. So unless we go for that concept, I think nothing else will become clarified.
Yes, but also to be clear that this is not because we don't like the Israeli Jewish people. It's because we want them to live in peace as well, and the only way to live in peace is by having a state that's democratic for everyone. Yeah.
I think it was a town hall meeting, the Democrats, the candidates were asked, do they believe in God? And nobody had the nerve to, yes, I do. I was so appalled. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, I haven't read a thing about it. They just responded, yeah, I believe in God.
Yeah, except Bernie Sanders was more generic about it. And I think it's quite amazing that he doesn't talk very much about being Jewish, and that it actually hasn't come up very much in the campaign. But yes, I mean, this is another example of the kind of things that candidates feel they have to do, because otherwise they will be seen, they'll lose sectors of the population that are religious, and they don't want to lose any of those people. But how religious? I mean, give me a break. When's the last time Donald Trump went to church? Yeah. Discussions, issues, questions, suggestions. Stu?
When you talked about the actions around Obama going to Saudi Arabia, and I just wondered if you want to expand a little bit on what's in the works or being planned so far, or how plans will be put together around that.
Well, we just found out a couple of days ago that he was going, and he's going April 21st, so it gives us a little bit of time to work on that. I was going to try to get an ad in the paper, work with one of the big groups like Abaz. Also, we have been trying to get members of Congress to write to Obama to ask him to meet with the pro-democracy people. It's amazing how hard that has been. We had been going to them and asking them, would you write a letter either to Obama, to John Kerry as Secretary of State, or directly to the Saudis to ask them not to execute these three young men. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's terrible. And they don't give us the letter. They don't give us the letter. I mean, it's almost like the Israel thing. They're afraid to go against the Saudis. Even on something like that, we say, some of them say, well, we don't really know enough about the case. I said, we'll send it to you. This is Amnesty International has taken on this case. The lawyers are this very respected group, Reprieve. What else do you need to know? And I said, they're nonviolent. We don't know that. I said, okay, say they threw a stone. Say they were violent. Should you execute? Should you behead and crucify juveniles? Yeah, of course you shouldn't. But to get them to actually do it. So I think by next week we might have a couple of them that did, but it's so hard to do. And now we're thinking maybe it'll be easier with the Cuba trip to make the equivalent kind of thing. So I'm actually very excited about that. And did I mention? No, I didn't mention, I think, that PBS has this great documentary that's coming out on Tuesday. It's called Saudi Arabia Uncovered. And it was done by in the UK for the TV there, and it's going to be broadcast here, and it's devastating. I mean, it's a lot on the three young men. It shows the young boy Ali Nimr with his family, and it talks to the father and the mother, and it's just heartbreaking. It shows them cutting off people's heads in the public squares. It's really. It's all done with hidden cameras, because you're not allowed to take pictures of any of this stuff. And so I think the timing is really good that that's going to be shown on Tuesday, and we're going to show it. We actually found a YouTube version of it that already came out, because it is shown last week in the UK, and we're going to set up a screen outside the Saudi embassy and show it there on Tuesday. And then we're trying to get Congress to do a showing of it as well. So I think it's good timing to push for it, but we're open and eager for other ideas.
As we talk about values and teachers and this being bleak times, there's also some exciting stuff actually coming up shortly, and one of them involves the faculty of the California State. Oh, okay.
I'd like to invite any member of the California State faculty who would like to tell people what's about to happen, or maybe about to happen. Can I nominate you?
How about Peter? I have something else I want to talk about. So I'll let you take that.
We're waiting for a negotiator's report early next week, which is simply going to say that they have more than enough money to give us a 5% raise. They've got a couple $2 billion in reserve. And the faculty have voted 90+% to strike on April 13th, and we're already planning a 5-day strike. which won't block any students from graduating this year, but it's certainly a strike that shows the solidarity of the faculty. It'll be one of the largest faculty strikes ever if it comes to fruition. You know, we teach 450,000 students in this system, and there's 25,000 faculty members, and so we have a very strong California Faculty Association union, and we're going to walk out on April 13th.
Wow, very exciting.
Statewide.
And are there ways people can support that?
Certainly come out and walk with us and write letters and everything, you know, yes, absolutely.
Is there a website or something for it?
The California Faculty Association.
CalFac. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've thought about this issue of Israel for so long, and Chuck Scher, who's here, comes and speaks to War and Peace students within a group of people, and that's always the most mind-blowing issue for our students, because even still, I think they're raised in a world where they've seen cowboys defending their land from Indians over and over again in one version of that narrative. And so I think it's the relationship of our country to the indigenous people of this country and other places in the world that is the elephant in the room. That to address that, to address the sort of complicity with history, that we are actually on the side of Israel in a way. You know, to look at what's going on there is to look at our own nation and what's going on right now. So I don't know, I just wanted to say that. And also I wanted to ask you about Honduras, if you were planning anything about Berta Cáceres or anything that's going on with respect to demanding some accountability and real honest investigation into her death, speaking of indigenous peoples.
So for anybody who doesn't know about that case, this is a Honduran leader in the indigenous movement called Copin in Honduras, and she has been fighting dams and mines her whole life, and she was recently assassinated, and then another member of the group was assassinated. And I am really pleasantly surprised at the outpouring of support for her and the demands for accountability. There was just a briefing in Congress about it with, not Congress people don't come, but the groups that are working on these issues just packed the room, and Berta's daughter was there, who was very compelling. And they have been super active in Honduras, getting out on the streets, really demanding justice, accountability. And in Washington, D.C., there have been groups that have done civil disobedience around this. They've gone into meetings of the Organization of American States and other meetings like that. There is a Secretary of State holding honoring courageous women this week, and we're hoping to get some people in there with Berta's pictures. Because she won the Goldman Prize, which is a very prestigious prize in this country for environmentalists, there's a big support movement for her, and a lot of people knew her. So it's reflective of the horrible things that have been going on since the coup in Honduras. And many people are pointing out Hillary Clinton's role as Secretary of State in supporting the coup and refusing to call it a coup, and keeping, forming relations with the coup government, and the death squads that have come out as a result of that are what led to the assassination of Berta Cáceres. So it is a horrible incident, but unfortunately, Honduras has become the center of death squads where journalists are being killed, where human rights defenders are being killed, women's rights defenders are being killed. And it shows what happens when you support coups. The same thing could be said in Egypt, where the coup that overthrew the first democratically elected government in Egypt has become a monster. 40,000 human rights activists in prison, hundreds of them sentenced to death. Now they're going to the human rights organizations and picking up those people, the ones that still exist, and putting them in prison. It's a horrible situation. And for a while, John Kerry couldn't bring himself to say, oh yes, this is an okay government, we should continue giving money. He held back. But after enough time went by, he said, Egypt is on the path towards democracy, which is so far from the truth, and released all the US funds, over $1 billion that go there. So very, very similar kinds of situations, and an example of why it's important to uphold international law and not support military coups.
Such as Chile.
Chile. Which brings up the Henry Kissinger issue. It's so interesting to hear Henry Kissinger as part of this presidential campaign when Hillary Clinton said that Henry Kissinger was a mentor to her, and Bernie Sanders said, oh my God, I would not want to associate with Henry Kissinger, and talking about his involvement in a coup in Chile that led to the death of so many, and his prolonging of the war in Southeast Asia. But yes, another example of how horrible military coups are. Yeah.
Couple of things. First of all, I would really like to know, and I would imagine there are some,
especially at a time like today when you wonder where are people getting their crazy values from to be with people who want to hold on to those good values of supporting each other and helping the least among us and treating each other with kindness. And the other thing I think that brings me joy is having a community that sings and laughs and dances and has fun together. It's really tough to do this work if you don't bring that levity and sense of humor into the work. And that's helped us in a lot of circumstances. When we were at APAC the other day, part of me as a Jew says, oh, you know, I am so depressed by seeing all these people that look like my family, you know, going into this huge 18,000 people going in to support APAC, and they were giving standing ovations to Trump. And yet, so part of you can get very angry and feel despair. And they were, there was a police barricade between us. And they would go by and look at our signs and yell at us and spit on us and, you know, really be very nasty. And we had made these walls that we put our heads, you know, would come out of the wall. And we would say, let's build bridges, not walls. Will you shake my hand? And here's the police line in here. And, you know, I'm putting my hand out and said, come on, let's shake hands. Let's show that we can agree to disagree, but we know that bridges are better than walls. And it was beautiful because some of the young people would come up and start shaking hands, and then we get into a good discussion. And it just changes the tone when we do things like that. And when we were doing a sit-in and blocking people, trying to block them from getting in because we did want to shut it down, we were singing the whole time and showing a kind of, you know, a depth of emotion that made it clear to people that this was serious stuff for us. So I think having that sense of community is the essential thing to keep going, and to know that our community is really a global one, that we could go anywhere in the world and find people who are doing similar kinds of things that we are doing. It's not often like on that February 15, 2003, when we all come out on the streets and you could say, oh my God, look, they're doing it all over. I mean, sometimes there are beautiful climate days or Earth days when we can do that. But I think to know in our hearts that most people around the world do share our values. But, you know, values are what you are taught. And we don't teach our young people very good values in this country. I mean, if a guy like Trump could get as far as he has gotten, what does that say about the values that we hold dear as a nation. Just the fact that there are millions of people, even if it's, he does get very high negatives among a lot of Americans, but even just the millions who are saying they're going to vote for him is, it's a phenomena that's quite startling to people around the world. And I don't know if you saw the latest about him putting his wife and Ted Cruz's wife picture out there to say, like, who's the babe? And then, oh yeah, this was yesterday's, like, and then today in the New York Times it had a list of quotes by Donald Trump about women. And oh my God, you start looking at these quotes, and he said some really horrible things over the years. And he's talking about, it doesn't matter anything else as long as you got a nice piece of ass, and you can't be a 10 if you have small breasts, and
Why is he saying that?
because that's what he believes. And so these things are starting to come out. Will they hurt him? Probably not. Just like anything else that he's done and said has not hurt him. But so what is, what do we do? Obviously, there's many people here that have chosen their candidate and are working hard for their candidate to get elected. My feeling is that we really dropped the ball under Obama. And Obama has said it just like FDR said it, make me do it. Make me do the right thing. And that's what every president needs, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. Make me do the right thing. I mean, look at the environmental movement. It's just been brilliant on the Keystone Pipeline. Absolutely brilliant in getting thousands of people to Washington to get arrested, in doing things locally and putting pressure on Congress people, in saying we're going to put pressure on Obama, getting all kinds of people involved, creating a real movement about it, having a lot of young energy involved. Who would have thought that Obama would come out against the pipeline? And he did. And the only reason he did is because there was a big, effective movement that made him do the right thing. And why did Hillary Clinton come out and say she was against the TPP, the trade agreement? Only because there is a movement out there, including a lot of people that are working class people, labor people, environmentalists, who have put pressure and pushed her to take the right position. So let's not despair. Let's recognize that a lot of the problems in this country are our own doing, because we have not created these movements. We talk about intersectionality. We talk about how we have to work together, that we're in our silos, and we keep remaining too much in our silos. I see a lot of that coming together around in Bernie Sanders' campaign, of people from lots of different movements coming together. I see the brilliance of the Black Lives Matter movement, absolute brilliance, to get so many people involved. Fortune magazine just came out and said, and it chose the 3 founders of the Black Lives Matter movement to be among the most influential people in the country. I mean, that's extra. Fortune magazine, it's not like a left wing. That is movement building. That's bringing it into the public eye. That's making people aware and forcing them to react to something. We just have to keep building these movements and keep connecting these movements. And I think that if Donald Trump, God forbid, becomes president, we're going to have a huge movement. We will have a bigger movement than we have ever seen before. And it will be intersectional, because there'll be so many people that will be out there protesting. If Bernie Sanders got in, it would be fantastic, and we'd have to have a huge movement that will allow him to do many things he wants to do. My fear? Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton. Because Hillary Clinton gets in, we're not going to have a huge movement. Hillary Clinton gets in, it's going to be the exact same thing as Barack Obama. How can you protest the first black president? How can you protest the first female president? It's the exact same thing. And so many people that have been out organizing and mobilizing, you find out they're really just partisan people. They just want their party to win. And when their party wins, they fade away until the next election. And they're not going to be out there with us trying to put the pressure on. So if Hillary wins, it's going to be the hardest for us in terms of doing our job as citizens in building movements that are strong enough, effective enough to force the people in power to do the right thing.
I heard a thing on KPFA the other day, and they were talking about the debates and saying that if Trump got to debate Hillary, that he would take her down. And he is so excited about the possibility. I don't know if you've heard him talk about it, because he feels he's got the goods on her. And then they were talking and saying that Bernie, people were pretty sure could take Trump, just because he's got the know-how and the guts and the stamina Trump does not have. Interesting.
Well, some of us might not like some of the policies of Hillary Clinton, but she is smart. And she knows a hell of a lot more than Donald Trump knows. And if debates are about policy issues, she's gonna wipe the floor with Donald Trump, really. I mean, he does not know these issues. There was just a meeting with the editorial board of the Washington Post of Donald Trump. And they came out and they wrote, look at the transcript of this meeting with Donald Trump. He doesn't know anything. When you ask him about one thing, he'll just go off on his same 2 notes that he does. We're getting beaten by the Chinese and we're getting eaten alive by the Mexicans. No matter what you ask him, he'll go back to this, couple of things that he talks about. So I actually think that Hillary Clinton will do much better than Donald Trump.
We were talking about values and religion. The irony for me, is that Bernie Sanders is probably closest to Jesus. And I don't say that facetiously. I mean, what he's talking about is community, it's about people, it's about love. Anyway, here's Joe.
I just have a quick question. Are you folks in touch with Bernie's campaign so that, assuming that he does not get the nomination, that all the energy that he's generated won't just dissipate?
That's the toughest thing, because we've seen it over and over from the Jesse Jackson Rainbow Coalition, the energy around Obama, it's really tough. Am I in touch with people in his campaign? I know a lot of people who work in his campaign, and we've been pushing him on some of these foreign policy issues that I must say he's gotten better and better on. He was very reluctant to talk about foreign policy issues, and now I think he feels much more comfortable, and his positions are quite good. What will happen to all that energy? Unfortunately, I think on the national level, there won't be the vehicle to keep it together. It will only be on the local level, where people have come together and met each other and formed bonds with each other, that there will be some energy there. But I hope I'm wrong.
Well, maybe, if you can get to Bernie on his way out, he could make a statement to his people to do exactly that.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about that, and people have been talking to him and say this has to be a movement, not a moment, and let's make this last. What happens afterwards, who knows? And the thing about Jesus, this is not really Jesus, but did you see that, was it today where he was speaking and the bird came on the podium? And he said, this is a dove that wants us to live in peace.
And I really like Bernie as well, but and I'll probably vote for him, but at the same time, he's beholden to certain constituencies as well, even if he's not taking tons of Wall Street money. I know, for instance, he did support some money going to Israel during the bombing campaign. So that's just something for us to take in, especially as we're moving forward in the left, trying to influence change and put pressure on our candidates to make those hard decisions. We can't be completely so enamored with someone like Bernie Sanders or anyone, just like what happened with Obama. So much of us, myself included, was fooled. I believed when I saw this man that he was going to stand behind everything that he explicitly said, but there have also been some implicit things within his record that indicate to me that it's important that we don't fall asleep. And just like you said, we have to make the candidate, whether they're Obama or someone who is, several shades further to the left, but not completely, like a sole socialist, that we don't just get the wool pulled over our eyes, and that we see these people in their shades of gray. He agreed to store bombers on one of his airports to pander to certain pro-army constituencies during his tenure. These are just things to keep in the back of our minds and just not forget that he can revert to these things as president if we don't see it clearly and work accordingly and organize. But I appreciate that. I appreciate all of your work. I'm young. I haven't contributed much, but thank you so much. I did want to mention that.
Excellent, very clear. I think you've learned a lesson that many older people have, maybe learned under Obama, but it took a long time to learn that. And so many of the things Obama had promised, we're still waiting for them, like closing Guantanamo was something that he campaigned around and said he was going to do in his first week in office. It's been 7 years.
And back to Israel for a moment too, because I think of Bernie. I read his speech, and it was okay. He did mention the Palestinians, but he still had this one-sided. He didn't quite say Jewish state, but he almost got there. But what it really is the way forward for that situation. I mean, if we do envision a single democratic state for everybody, that is the end of the Jewish state, right there, instantly. And then because it's like 50-50 ethnic population now, Jewish and Palestinian in the whole territories. And within a few years, it will be majority Palestinian. So how? I mean, I get where AIPAC's actually coming from, because they've. How can you really? What is the way forward there? I mean, how can you really give up the Jewish state? How can you convince people to give up the Jewish state? If that's what you think should be done.
Well, just like I was saying, it's up to the Iraqi people to get rid of Saddam Hussein and have a more democratic government. It's up to the people who live in the territory, Israel and Palestine, to come up with a solution. Our job is to get out of the way. And we've been in the way. We've been giving $3 billion a year of our tax dollars to the Israeli military. And it turns out to sweeten the Iran deal, we said, okay, we'll give you an extra $1 billion a year, $4 billion. Well, that wasn't enough. Netanyahu said, no, give us $5 billion a year. And AIPAC was lobbying for $5 billion a year. So our job is to stop our tax dollars from going to support the Israeli military. Our job is to stop. It should be illegal for people in this country to be giving money to groups that are supporting the illegal settlements. And there's a lot of work on the BDS campaign that we can do that will have an impact within the psyche of the legitimacy of the Israeli state. So I would say, our job is to stop our government from being a one-sided enabler of the Israeli government.
But I was wondering if you see, is there a positive way, though, to actually ensure, the security of the Jewish people there without being a Jewish state? Is there a way to take care of the fears around that? Do you know Sami Awad in Israel? So I know that's one of his main issues, is to somehow the Jewish people there have to feel safe. And so do you have ideas about how to actually go about making them feel safe enough so to go back to being once again a minority, which they will?
Well, unfortunately, the way the Jewish Israeli have thought of safety is weapons. and the weapons are not the way. There are so many wonderful Jewish and Israeli groups that are working together. So many wonderful examples. I mean, they have symphony groups, and they have hip-hop groups together, and they have peace camps where they come together, and there's hundreds of examples of wonderful Palestinian and Israeli Jews coming together to show, yes, we can live in peace. There's the Rabbis for Human Rights. There are endless number of groups. And when people ask where are all the Palestinian Gandhis, the Palestinians answer, well, the best ones are actually in Israeli prisons. So I don't think that we have to come up with answers for them. I think they have answers. We have to stop the militarization, stop the enabling, stop the Security Council vetoes so that the UN actually does admonish and put sanctions on Israel for its actions. Those are the kind of things that we have to do.
This is very intimidating. This may be a really naive question, but is it not our job to insist that our government stop giving our money away? It's our money. We're forced to pay it. And as we have neighborhoods that are crumbling and schools that are, is it not our job to, take it away from the politics of, other countries' problems and bring it, that this is our country's problem. We need to support our own country and our own people and the health of our children. And so is that just a really naive way of looking at it? If it's just taken out of the realm of, I don't know what that really is.
Well, you're saying more from a national interest in that we need this money here at home. Yes, it's a good argument to use, but it doesn't work all that well. When people think that Israel is our closest ally and they help us be secure in the world because we need a democratic ally in this horrible region, it's like give them whatever money they need. The money that is being spent in this war on terror, ridiculous amounts of money, but people say if this is what is going to keep me safe, then spend whatever you have to spend. So, we try to use that argument. We've had a campaign for years at Code Pink called Bring Our War Dollars Home, saying, in fact, the whole founding of our organization is to say, stop the militarism and use that money for sustainable energy, for schools, for blah, blah, blah. On one level, the majority of people agree with that. On another level, when things like San Bernardino happen or Belgium, the bombings happen, then suddenly they can be turned around and then we lose them. So it's a little more complicated. So let's take these last, we're almost out of time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then.
Medea, I just want to thank you so much for your work. You're such an inspiration, and Code Pink is such a happy activist organization. It's so refreshing to my psyche to read your newsletters and hear your creative, playful, powerful interventions. And speaking of money, I just want to give you a donation right now.
I planted her right here.
Please don't forget to show our support with our pocketbooks.
Oh, that's very, very sweet of you.
I happened to catch this morning the head of the Pentagon making a case again for not closing Gitmo because of the latest person that they killed just over the last 2 days. One of the heads, the second top guy in ISIL, they said the finance minister. And they kept asking, well, now did this guy really have anything to do with, the stuff in the field? And oh, well, yes. And
he was in Guantanamo. He had been released? No.
He had, years and years ago, he had been released from a prison in Afghanistan, I think. so that was the case too. Why we have to have
I have to say that
Guantanamo.
that they have caught that guy 3 times, and that was pointed out by
Yeah.
Zero Head this morning.
Yeah.
That they've caught the same number 2 guy 3 times.
Yeah.
So
So that's their case.
But closing Vietnam doesn't free these people. They don't go free.
Well, that was the point, is they said, well, then you gotta take them to another facility, and what country is it gonna be?
The US, they've already said that.
Yeah, but this was a case to not do that. This was a case to keep.
Well, I'm surprised because most of the people in the military want to close Gitmo. I mean, they know that it is a national security threat to us to have that. And I talked about them not letting us in the hearing with our orange jumpsuits. They said in that hearing, why do you think ISIS dresses its prisoners in orange jumpsuits before they cut their heads off? You know, it's a symbolic of this is the kind of thing you do in the United States. So the majority of people in the military would like to see Gitmo closed, and in fact, we work very closely with a number of the lawyers who were the military lawyers who hate the system and say it's a terrible system. And they say that these people have been held for so long, who have been cleared for release, release them. And you know, hundreds of them had been released. The figures came out for how many had gone back to the fight. According to the military, a lot fewer under Obama, but Bush released hundreds of people. And Obama, they say that the figure is somewhere between 5% and 7%, which you wonder, I mean, if somebody kept you illegally in indefinite detention, maybe tortured you, and how would you feel? And might you want to exact some revenge? So you can understand why people would want to fight afterwards, but it's been actually a very small percentage of them.
Thanks, Medea, and thanks for being here. You've mentioned green energy and sustainable energy a few times. I work in the climate and renewable energy space. And
thank you for your service.
Thank you. Does that mean I can board the plane now? Good. Get on the plane. Relatively recently, there's been some indicators that there might be a sort of a shift underway in thinking about both climate and the embracing of renewable energy. And I mean, polls have shown for a long time that the people generally support renewable energy, but I'm just wondering about any observations you might have being in DC among the leadership there, the Congress, you know, is there any indication that you've seen that there might be some more embracing of renewable energy, perhaps not because it's a green thing, but because of the economics and the independence and all the other, you know, reasons that might cross the aisles?
It's such a partisan issue. You know, Democrats mostly are in favor and Republicans are against, and you still have so many people in the Republican Party who are, you know, flat earthers, and this whole thing about government subsidies and too much money, and then with a glut of oil. It's very interesting the way some of this has played out because the Saudis have put so much oil on the market, it's driven out the people doing fracking. And fracking has become more expensive compared to cheap oil from other places. But you know, how long is that going to last? I don't see, people still bring up like the money that Obama gave to Solyndra, $500 million. And they say, look, government subsidy to solar energy, and the company went out of business. Well, how about taking, instead of 500 million, 379 billion for an airplane we don't need, and putting that into a new economy? I think it's ridiculous that we let them get away with that because they just waste so much money on weapon systems that don't work, are not useful. And when there's one example they can give of a bad government investment in green energy, they'll keep bringing that up over and over and over again. So unfortunately, I think it's still too much of a partisan issue. So we have these two last comments. Yeah.
I'd like to address the woman's question about supporting war with our tax dollars. There is people that are called war tax resistors. I'm sure a lot of people here know about them. So there's like the National War Tax Resistors Coordinating Committee, which is NUTREC, NWTRCC. And many of their members, it's a very small group, but many of their members, I understand, will earn less than $12,000 a year, so they don't have to pay any income tax to the federal government. That's one way you can resist. And then there's other people, such as myself, who I wanted to talk to Medea after this talk about a bill that's been introduced, for about the past 40 years, for at least the past 20 years by John Lewis of Georgia, called the Religious Freedom Peace Tax Fund. And I believe it was a Quaker bill originally. And if it ever became law, you could check a box on your tax return form that says, I don't want my tax dollars going to support the military, which would be fantastic. And I think that can get passed if we work on it. I don't think we can now get rid of our military. That will never happen. It's not going to happen. So I think, praying or even working to get rid of the military, not going to happen. But we can, if a few of us just sign up, if it ever passed, the Religious Freedom Peace Tax Fund, how the hardcore war tax resistors say, well, you're giving more money to the federal government, even though they're not going to use your money for the war, you're giving them more power. But if 70, 80, 90 million of us or more, dreaming, of course, check the box on the tax return form, that would be how we can, take money away from the military. And I'll just close by saying that Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the chief of staff to Colin Powell, in an interview that I saw, it's on YouTube, conducted by this woman, I forget her name, I'm sure a lot of you know her.
Abby Martin?
Yeah. There's an Abby Martin interview with Lawrence Wilkerson. It's about 28 minutes. In the last 2 minutes, I don't know what the question was, but his answer was, the only way that anybody is going to stop the U.S. military is citizens taking to the streets, right? So we have to take to the streets, which would be very extreme, and we get killed anyways. But the Religious Freedom Peace Tax Fund will take money away from the military, and that would be the equivalent, I believe, of taking to the streets. Because really, our military might is so superior that we here in this country have to take them on.
Remember, they're so superior, but they haven't won a war in a long time.
About Cuba, now that we're finally doing away with this pointless embargo of Cuba, it could hardly be a better peace offering to them than giving them their property back. That they've never recognized our ownership of Gitmo, and we don't need it. And it's a major propaganda coup for ISIL and everybody else. We should give it back to them. We send them a check, I guess, every year, and every year they tear it up. So not to close it for sure. Yeah, it's too bad he didn't do it the first week that he would.
Yeah, unfortunately, Obama acts like that's a ridiculous demand, like that's not even on the table. But it is somebody else's territory, and we certainly would not allow that in the United States. So when we talk about closing the prison of Guantanamo, we always say, and give the base back to the Cuban people. It will eventually be given back. No, it can't stay like this forever, but it is so strange that with this imperial attitude that so many Americans have, they feel that we have the right to other people's land. And I guess it goes back to the Native American issue that was brought up here, and the issue of supporting occupiers and being occupiers. And I guess on the issue of our military, the American people are tired of war, and when we saw that when Obama wanted to get more involved in the war in Syria and had his red line there, and people rose up on all sides of the political spectrum and said no. The danger is these bombings that are happening, like the one in Brussels, because that can really turn people around very quickly. And the danger is what the candidates are saying. And when they're talking about carpet bombing and lighting up the desert and that kind of stuff, it's really not only disgusting, it makes the Americans who support them go, yeah. And the narrative that's out there, and that I see every day in Washington, D.C., is that Obama is not doing enough militarily, that Obama is a wimp, that Obama is tying the military's hands behind their back, and that's why we're not, quote, winning. So this is, the narrative that we are up against, and Donald Trump is saying, I'm going to rebuild the military. Well, hello, the military is bigger than every other military combined, and so what are you going to rebuild? And how is being bigger than it is now going to make us any safer? I think, with the dangerous narrative out there, our job is to build links with the Muslim community in our country that feels so beleaguered and is now being told that, Donald Trump saying we're going to monitor your communities, and the Islamophobia is just going to get worse and worse. So it's really important that we reach out to people in those communities, that we do solidarity actions. And the last thing I want to say is what you mentioned just about how we have to stop wars. And you mentioned Larry Wilkerson, who spent his life in the military and then was chief of staff for Colin Powell. Watch that interview and watch other interviews of him. Just Google him on YouTube. He is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And he's really fun to listen to because he says things that we say. And he's coming from a totally different position, and he knows a lot of inside things. I mean, I talked to him the other day, just kind of in passing, and I said something about I was working on Saudi Arabia, and he went on about Saudi Arabia, and he said, something I wouldn't say, the only democratic country in the Middle East, he said, including Israel, is Iran. That's what he said, yeah, which just blew my mind. He says a lot of very interesting things, and he does say that people have to mobilize. And some people have looked back on the days that I was touting as so wonderful, that February 15th when everybody came out, and they said, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have just come out on a weekend and done a march and go home. We should have sat down. We should have just sat in the street. And we should have not moved until George Bush said we're not going to invade. And I think it's a fantasy maybe, but a beautiful one to think about it. And a beautiful one to think about millions of people checking off that box. But if we have the majority of young people now looking at an alternative to capitalism, I mean, certainly this is a time in the country when people are searching. And for young people, just think, we have been at war for almost your entire lives now, perpetually. And that is not a normal state to be in. That's an abnormal state to be in. So I think we have to feed upon this yearning that we see out there for something different, and reach out to people with these alternatives, and radical alternatives like sitting down in the street and not leaving. And so many of the things we do are walking around in circles, and one weekend when everything's closed anyway, and that's it. And I see in Washington, when we had more of a Code Pink crew and we'd take 100 people into an office, they would have to deal with us. Just like that YouTube that's up there of Hillary Clinton when we went into her office and we were 100 people. And we were spilling out all over the place, and we said, we're not leaving until we meet with her. And lo and behold, she wasn't available, nobody knew where she was, whatever, she appeared. And so, you know, we've got to get more radical in the way we organize, in the way we mobilize. And I think it was one of the Berrigans who said, you know, look at how much energy and is put into waging war. We've got to put that same kind of energy into waging peace. Thank you.